Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Top Down and All Around How Chicago Public Schools is Committing to IMS Standards. We are glad you guys have joined us and are excited to have phenomenal speakers with us today. Chicago Public Schools is the third largest district in the nation, but despite their size, are accomplishing great tasks, and we are thrilled that they are here to share just a portion of their story with us, sharing how they have successfully designed, implemented, and evaluated their digital curriculum. Before I introduce our phenomenal speakers, let me first introduce myself. I am Karen Daughtery, one of the K-12 Institutional Program Managers with IMS Global. And here with me today, helping host this event, is Kara Jenkins, Director of Marketing Communications. Please be reminded that your audio is muted and will remain muted throughout our webinar. But please, we would like for this webinar to be as interactive as possible, so we are encouraging all of our attendees to utilize the Q&A feature inside WebEx, and Kara and I will keep an eye on that and answer those questions throughout our time together. Today's webinar is provided to give you guys an insight into how IMS Global Standards can help evolve your digital ecosystem. When we take a look at the larger picture, we understand that each district, each institution has so many different systems, and it is very difficult to make sure all of those systems are working together. In IMS Global, it is our vision that everyone who is involved and leading the way through the work of IMS Global, we are helping each other discover ways in which your digital system can work together by utilizing the tools and open standards that we have to offer. And by doing so, just like our speakers that are here with us today, you too will start to see your digital ecosystem evolve. One of the ways that IMS helps our K-12 districts is through our Digital Learning Revolution program. This program is designed to meet you where you're at, whether you are just starting out and making a commitment to purchasing or speaking to your vendors about utilizing those IMS open standards, or if you're implementing one roster and building that foundation in your ecosystem to make sure that your products are rostered all the way through instructional impact and advanced insights, where we start to see open badges and some of our newer standards, competency and academic standards exchange, CASE, being utilized. Our program guides you through the implementation process, gives you the tools and resources you need to help revolutionize your ecosystem. So I'm ready to turn it over to Chicago Public Schools and hear how they are committing to IMS standards. We have four wonderful guests with us today: Giovanni, Benincasa, Ron Carroll, Marty McGuire, and Tony Williams. So guys, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thanks, it's a pleasure, and good afternoon to everyone. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about our digital curriculum from our various viewpoints. Natural place to begin is why we're doing this. Our theory of action for this particular project, we spend a lot of time, a lot of resources measuring student learning, seeing how schools are performing. But what are we really measuring? Are we actually measuring learning, or are we measuring the difference between the quality of the materials from classroom to classroom or from school to school? So on the one hand, we want to make sure that if we can implement a curriculum system, our expectations can be consistent, because at least the opportunity is consistent. We feel very strongly that all CPS students should be able to have equitable access to the best. And currently, the state of affairs is very diffused. Um, so digital is the best way for us to deliver this, and that's what we're trying to do for every student in Chicago Public Schools. I'm going to turn this over to Tony to talk a little bit about the digital ecosystem.
All right, thanks, Giovanni. So the previous slide mentioned return on investment. And this graphic does a good job of illustrating that, kind of you think about the 30,000-foot view of the enterprise tools and resources that we have in the district. If you pare that down a little further, the 20,000-foot view is the standard. So this is where IMS is critical in that space. As you can see, that we've really thought through a lot of the standards that will be embedded throughout this work. And then paring down even further, the 10,000-foot view of the outcomes that result from both from the enterprise standpoint, the standards that plug into those enterprise tools, and then the outcomes. It's a massive undertaking, but I'm confident the gentlemen in this room, coupled with some other folks that are on the team, will really help us think through this. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of our partners in ITS as well, that are helping kind of think through this work and the design of it and ultimately the outcomes. But this gives a high-level overview, again, of the digital ecosystem that we're pushing towards. This is kind of our end state from a technical standpoint, but this doesn't necessarily address and touch on, to Giovanni's point, the curriculum piece of it, which is really the driving force. This is just kind of the sweets and the thing, not the sweets, but excuse me, the pieces that happen behind the scenes, the mechanics, so to speak, taking a look under the hood of some of the work that's happening in CPS to really drive the curriculum to a digital level. So, and this is my colleague, Marty McGuire here, is going to touch on some pieces a little bit later, but this is kind of what we're thinking initially in terms of where the standards plug in through our various applications and resources. Again, this is extremely high level, but this just gives an overview of kind of where we are at current state. And he'll touch on it a little bit later in terms of the iterative process and just the redesigning, even in our thinking, when we initially kind of went down this path, and then where we're going to the holy grail of what interoperability looks like. The other driver besides the curriculum for this is really from a relationship standpoint. We realize that it's going to take a lot of experts in the room, especially from a partnership level, that have already done this work and have done this work with other school districts. That and the knowledge and skill set of the folks over at IMS that have been great partners for us to really design and rebuild our thinking around this effort. With that being said, I want to turn it back over to Giovanni to touch on some of the curriculum pieces. It's really at the crux of why we do this work.
Thanks, Tony. So, in order to make the system work, the people are pretty important, and the buy-in has to be developed. So you can imagine in a district as large as this, we have an incredible amount of stakeholders at work in this project. And in order to point us in the best way to develop it, we have a group that we call the Curriculum Collaborative that is helping us in this work. So this group involves people at the school level, from teachers, assistant principals, specialists, and students. It also has to do with our external partners from the content providers and the staff that we use to support instruction at the schools from our networks. We also are partnering with the Chicago Teacher Union and university partners. You can imagine municipal partners providing Wi-Fi where it needs to be. So these are all the stakeholders that have to be involved in order for this system to actually be able to deliver on the equity promise that we're making to our children for this. We are moving outward, so you can imagine at the onset, it's a smaller grouping that is working on this. So in the first phase, the planning phase, we have a lot of central office staff around our subject area teams and our specialty area teams that are defining what's our framework for our curriculum. What standards are we aligning to? Thinking about the way in which we serve our English language learners, diverse learners, students with IEPs, how we are approaching curriculum from a design standpoint, like universal design, how we are dealing with diverse learning styles, all of that needs to be defined. And when you begin a definitional process like that, you start to realize even terms like what's a unit, what's a lesson, require a little bit of thought so that you can communicate that effectively to your external partners when you move on to phase two. In the second phase, we're prototyping the curriculum. We have to begin by norming our framework with our partners, developing models for what that digital curriculum is going to look like, and then begin a process of actually building it. And we're building it across 6 different content areas, and we're building it from pre-K all the way to 12. So it's an enormous endeavor, and it's going to involve many, many different stakeholders. As the expectations are normed and as the initial samples are developed, our quality control process is going to be involved in the third phase of making sure that our vendors understand our expectations and are building towards it, and that we're building towards the expectations that we've set for ourselves. In that process, this circle keeps expanding. At this point, the curriculum begins to touch teachers. It begins to get some field input back, which is essential because this project is going to largely depend on the input that we receive from users. As that build goes on with user input, the final phase of implementation is the phase that will never complete. We'll be iterating this curriculum onward. So we're building it in such a way that it can be continuously improved over time, and that we're able to expand it. There are some subject areas that weren't initially included, and as we grow, and as what learning looks like in schools evolves over time, that's the most critical aspect of the digital delivery, is rather than buying inert materials, textbooks, and so forth that become obsolete, we're able to have the curriculum grow with us over time. None of this would be possible unless we're dealing with a common standard. Because while this sounds great, for the most part, in the experience of teachers in the field, when we add technology, we add additional administrative burdens. And rather than having a situation where we keep layering platform after platform on our teachers and students, from this perspective, we can leverage interoperability so that they're having more of a seamless experience across platforms, and that we can do a variety of different tasks and have data being shared and not having as many redundant compliance tasks for teachers and students to do to show evidence of their learning, and so forth. Turning it over to Marty to continue.
So hello everyone, and welcome. To talk a little bit about the program overall, I'll just touch upon something that was already said. We're the third largest school district in the United States. We have over 20,000 teachers, over 360,000 students, and over 600 school buildings. As we started to, in years past, we had more of a decentralized approach to resource and technology deployment. It was really up to the schools as to what type of content they wanted to use, what type of technologies they wanted to have. That created inequities, and inequities that are being addressed through our adoption of interoperable and integratable tools through IMS. We needed a reliable, secure, and equitable access to media for everyone. We wanted high-quality instructional resources in a variety of formats. That's videos, that's web resources, images, interactive and 3D content, streaming content, and content that we as a district create and make accessible to schools, to teachers, to administrators across the district. And in my favorite, we wanted to bring in live content options directly into the classroom. partnering up with institutions from across the country and bringing in subject matter experts live into our classrooms. Right. While streaming in CPS is widely used, we needed a solution that allowed us to locally host videos so that we can preserve internet bandwidth. We needed an adaptive bitrate solution to help optimize the end user experience based on not only the computers that they're using, whether it's a Mac, a PC, a Chromebook, but also based on the actual connection that they had in the classroom. Was it a hardware connection? Is it a wireless connection? What was the infrastructure like? So that we can ensure that the highest quality playback of resources based on the real-time conditions of that school, of that classroom, can be met. In our district, we do a ton of content creation. So we wanted a solution that not only allowed students to do fun type stuff like school daily news announcements, maybe broadcasting the LSC meeting, school assemblies, graduation type things. We do a lot of this type of stuff ourselves. In fact, currently, half of the content that's currently being used in our district is content that we've created ourselves. So I'm really happy about that. I think that's about to be overrun by the actual content that we're now bringing in through publishers. But we do a lot of creation of content ourselves, and it's something that we needed to make sure was addressed as part of our platform. Benefits of live streaming to K-12 classrooms, bringing live resources into the classroom. I'll talk a little bit about stats around that. Access to current events in real time, and the ability to create on-demand digital resources for future use. Let me share a couple of stats with you right now. Currently in our district, we do about 12 very large streams a year, and that has to do with our Chicago Board of Ed monthly meeting. We do that through our current digital media platform, Safari Montage. We do it via multicast throughout the district, and we probably have somewhere in the area of anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 people that tune into that live event every month. More exciting is the kind of events that are taking place directly in the classroom. This year, we will complete 530 live classroom activities, museums, aquariums, science centers, authors, different organizations that we've partnered up with that are bringing their subject matter experts directly into our classroom. What we've been able to do is bridge the formal and informal learning institutions to really tap into subject matter experts that are out there and bring that expertise directly into the classroom. In addition to those 530 events that we do for the classroom, we do roughly about 200 district events, district-wide webinars. This number is consistently falling as the years continue on. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that the technology is such that people are more comfortable doing this type of stuff themselves. But what's important is that the webinars that we are capturing, the webinars we do, get archived, uploaded into our Learning Object Repository, and distributed throughout the district. So that's wonderful. Some of the future stuff that we're now looking at, some of the stuff that's going to, now that we have this ecosystem, we're going to be doing a lot more when it comes to school news. I was just talking to a colleague of mine earlier about college virtual tours that we're going to be tackling next year, where we're going to be working with universities from across the country and their admission directors and allowing students to take virtual tours of those institutions right from their classroom or from home. We're also going to be starting career programs and interviews, and we're adding additional after-school programs with a lot of the subject matter experts with institutions from across the country. As we look at what is needed to tackle this in the classroom, so we have all this wonderful resources, we have this district-wide ecosystem that we put together. Now our attention is starting to turn towards what's happening in the classroom. While everything was, as I mentioned earlier, is somewhat decentralized, we're now starting to come up with plans and recommendations for schools to kind of insist upon what we think they need to have within the classroom to take advantage of all of these resources, to take advantage of 3D content, live and interactive content, on-demand content, content from publishers, content that the district creates. So this is kind of like a little picture of kind of where we're going. We're looking at one-to-one deployment as far as computers are concerned, Chromebooks, PCs, and iPads throughout the district. We're looking at kind of an audio enhancement type solution for the classroom. And we're still it's still up in the air as far as what that classroom, front of the classroom resource would be, whether it's a smart board, Promethean board, an interactive touch display. But these are some of the recommendations we're now making to our schools. So IMS Standards is helping CPS simplify our digital learning ecosystem. And this is kind of a future of what that ecosystem looks like. Tony showed you a slide earlier. This is kind of just an adjustment of that slide as the tools and interoperability, as integratable and interoperable tools continue to make their way into the district. This is what we feel our ecosystem will look like in the future. And for that, I will now turn it over to Ron.
So one of the main challenges, of course, is the human capital on the back end here. And so one of the questions is, how do we work on training? And what's really kind of interesting is at this point, we're still early in this process. And the training is more about selling the dream than actually training on a particular piece of hardware or any particular systems. So we have right now what we call our Trailblazers. It's our pilot beta tester schools. We're in 40 schools with 120 classroom teachers, basically 2 to 4, 3 per school, that we're training as beta testers. So as new pieces of the puzzle come out, these are our first point of contact to field test it in the classroom and make sure that it really works before we launch to the district at large. With that, we've got a curriculum that we're working with those Trailblazers where we're training them around the 4 C's of digital learning, SAMR, and how to integrate technology into the classroom, as well as models of blended learning and project-based digital learning, all wrapped up in digital citizenship, because as we go more digital, that becomes a very important piece. That's kind of where we're headed with that. Now with those folks, we always show this in the next slide, because this is a design process. This is an iterative process as we go through all of this. And, this is the smooth, ideal cycle where, we reach out to our beta testers, we watch them, operate with the various systems, get ideas, go back to our vendors, fix all of this stuff. But in reality, it looks a lot more like this, where there's constant back and forth, a lot of squiggling around as we try to really figure out how this works, truth be told. And so that's really where we are in the early stages here with training our folks, is just getting them prepared to be comfortable with uncomfortableness, as it were. And it's going really well with those beta testers, and we've learned a lot for how to scale this up. So that's actually, I think, our slides. And we definitely are interested in answering any questions and providing any insights that you guys may be interested in.
Thank you to you guys. I do have a couple of questions here just to get us started, and to all of you in attendance, we would love to hear from you as well. Please submit your questions or comments or anything that you need clarified for our guest today in the Q&A panel, and we will be sure to address those during our time together. But, you guys together, when Giovanni was talking a little bit earlier and talking about growing your curriculum, and you're continuing to iterate, and that's going to be a continuous growth process. I would imagine in that process, you guys have come across various products that were legacy products in your ecosystem. Can you talk a little bit about the process you guys went through in making sure your current products were up to par on where you needed them to be so that you guys could be successful in getting your curriculum where it is today?
Sure, it's a great question. It's a very diffused environment of platforms and apps that are generally selected due to teacher preference, and that's one of the problems. It's not necessarily a problem for teachers to innovate and find things that they like, but understanding whether there's an appropriate amount of rigor associated with that app or that platform to actually grow student understanding becomes the issue. One of the outside organizations that we're partnering with, and it doesn't exactly work this way, but they can give you a really good way to think about your curriculum resources, is something called EdReports. EdReports is a nonprofit, and what they do is that they're in the business of being kind of a consumer reports for curriculum. Most of what they're evaluating are things that are more traditional, like a textbook series, a reading program, and so forth. But I have found using their rubrics around ELA, around math, around science, applicable to looking at a platform or an app to understand some basic aspects of it. Is the learning aligned to any sort of measurable standard? And, can you explicitly say that certain skills are being taught by this platform? Are those skills appropriate to the age or level that they're being used by? Additionally, the rubrics provide a way of thinking about usability, because one teacher may think that it's a very slick user experience that works intuitively, and we know intuitive doesn't exist. It's just what you're familiar with. So it has a way of judging learning materials based on their alignment to learning goals and their ability, their user friendliness, and then finally the way in which it addresses, adaptation and being able to be used by a range of learners. So EdReports was a good guide in evaluating current state.
If I can just piggyback off that too, really quickly to the point of the legacy systems in the environment. So to be completely transparent, we still have legacy systems in our environment. The conversations is about how do we sunset those applications to ensure that, one, we have whatever it is that we're replacing them with, one, does conform to the standard, and then two, what is the end result? So what's the outcome and what is the intent of whatever the new application is? And the idea behind that is to ensure that, one, is functional, is seamless, and my colleague Ron always likes to point out that technology should work quietly in the background, right?
It should become transparent.
It should become transparent, yeah. So I'm quoting my good friend over there, but that's the idea behind it. And as we move forward, we know that a lot of these legacy systems, they will become more and more glaring in terms of what they don't provide. But going back to that classroom of the future that Marty showed earlier, is the intent is, one, from the application standpoint, the enterprise, what is it that it will provide? What is it that we need it to do? Secondly, does it indeed provide utility to the folks that are using the tools downstream? So they don't have to know how this all works. They don't need to see how the sausage is made. They just want to know the sausage is being made and it's tasty.
Yeah, ultimately a classroom teacher doesn't care about IMS global standards. What they care about is when I enter my grades here, it goes there, exactly. And I now have access to this data, and I can help teach my students. And, that's that end goal. It only works because of these standards. Like a year ago, 2 years ago, a lot of this is unthinkable. But, it becomes possible. And that goes back to the dream I'm selling to the teachers. Teachers want this tomorrow. They want it yesterday. We're just working towards it.
There's also a big, when you think about the diffused environment where people are using lots of different platforms, that counts against a student's capacity to learn.
Yeah.
The novelty of the platform, this looks different, that's actually working against the student's cognitive load. So when you are able to integrate systems and create more of a seamless user interface experience across platforms,
Yeah.
there's actually a teaching outcome that comes from that. Because you don't want to tax the learner with the novelty of what they're looking at while they're also trying to learn a concept. That's just not a good digital learning practice.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely goes to some of the inequities that we're trying to, and inequalities that we're trying to fix with this, is standardizing platforms and practices across the district. You know, we're large, as you mentioned, third largest, and we have a lot of movement, both staff and student, between schools. And so if you've been at let's say a one-to-one iPad school, and then you go to a Chromebook school, then all of a sudden you have to learn an entire new tool set. Or even worse, you're at a school that has no technology, and then you're at a one-to-one school, whatever it is. What outcomes can we actually judge and count towards when you have no idea what you're doing staring at the screen?
Thank you. So Tony and Ron and Giovanni and Marty, we have some additional questions, so I'm going to run through them, but thank you for answering that. The first is, can you talk a little more about what you see as the student hub for digital curriculum? Is that Google Classroom or an LMS?
At the moment, we are trying to push the boundaries of Google Classroom. We might move towards an LMS. I think that definitely is a piece that is under consideration right now, because there needs to be a central hub. You know, we've got the Learning Object Repository of Safari Montage, but that's not really where you're constantly living. And so right now, Google Classroom is where we're trying to shoehorn that.
Yeah, and you know, does the ecosystem itself function as an LMS? That's the open question.
And it is an open question right now.
You have Google Classroom as the place where the students will touch the learning materials, either Safari playlists that are assigned to class, different functions within Google Classroom. We also are standing up an assessment platform that is integrated, and you know, whether it's a district-wide interim assessment or whether it's a classroom teacher engaging the item bank to pull items for assessment, you know, those are going to be then, you know, feeding the online grade book in terms of results. So in terms of, do we need an LMS, or do we create within this ecosystem such a seamless experience among the assessment platform, among the Safari playlists, and among Google Classroom? You know, that's what we're determining right now.
I mean, I think ultimately that's going to come down to the grade book.
Yeah.
And whether that all integrates. So that's where we are on that one.
Okay, and there actually was a question that just came in about what is your gradebook integration, and are you piloting the new Google gradebook?
Excellent question. We actually just launched the beta Google gradebook with those 140 teachers. There currently is no integration with our regular gradebook, and that is something that we are definitely in talks with our SIS and Google, that being our student information system being one of those legacy systems that doesn't support one roster. At the moment is a bit of a challenge on that, but you know, we're kicking them and they're hopefully getting us there.
Okay, I'm going to keep going through. Do you have requirements on your digital curriculum for vendors? Are you balancing both physical books and resources as well as online?
Yeah, absolutely. The playlists can be misunderstood as something direct to students, you know, because the term playlist, the way we use it in terms of media and things like that, they are intended to be teacher-led. They are intended to provide a scaffold for a lesson. So on the one hand, you could think of it in the same way that a teacher might use a Google slide deck or a PowerPoint to scaffold the lesson, where there might be information displayed, but a pair share going on in terms of instruction or small group work. That said, the paper lives alongside. We know that even existing curriculum resources in schools, based on the research, can live alongside a digital curriculum for 3 to 5 years because of familiarity in terms of the teacher. So certainly we have no fantasy that digital replaces paper the day we launch, or even in the short term. And when you see teachers using better instructional methods, jigsawing activities, you will see a grouping of of students over here working on a task, a grouping of students on a different task. You're rarely, if you're seeing good teaching, going to see an entire classroom of students doing the same thing at the same time, unless it's to receive a little bit of direct instruction prior to an activity, or if it's an assessment that's being taken.
And then how often do your beta test teachers reorder or remix their playlists?
Right now, truth be told, not a lot. There's not a ton of content for them to remix at the moment. That's all in contracting at the moment. But
yeah, to clarify, because I think at the beginning it might have been stated that we've already implemented. We are just finishing the RFP process with the content providers. We will spend the majority of the next year norming and validating and doing some production, with only our first content drops coming in the spring of 2020. And then it's a 3-year process from that year before all of the content is fully dropped. So we will be living in a hybrid environment, and that's also to our benefit as we're scaling up. If you think about the amount of professional development from platform to devices to actually unlocking the curriculum, we need every bit of that time at the scale of 600 plus schools to do this. So I hope people didn't get the wrong idea that we're living in current state. These are our plans. This is the roadmap that we're working on. However, back to the remix question, it's our assumption that every teacher will get their own copy of the district curriculum, and then for the purposes of differentiation, multiple tiered systems of support at the tier 1 level, that we're going to see our teachers, probably their first move is going to be around creating reviews and remixing content in different ways for different ranges of learners. If you have the curriculum, the incentive to go and create an entirely different digital curriculum is probably not your first move, but adapting that playlist for a variety of learners is what we expect lots of the customization energy is going to center around from the standpoint of the teacher. And I think that's what you're hearing in the initial professional development round, right?
yeah, I mean, they're excited by the concept, for sure.
Okay, next question. In choosing products or tools, do you look more for things that integrate well with your system, or do you look for the ideal product and then find a way to integrate those?
Good question. I think both and, yeah. I feel like it's a combination of the two. Ultimately, as a district, we don't want to make blanket decisions about what's actually working in the classroom without talking to the folks that are in the classroom delivering the instruction. So I think that's the important piece, to know, one, what's being used. So environmental scans across the district. What are the tools that are being used? Is it effective? We need to build those mechanisms internally to do that data collection, and those are kind of ongoing conversations, but it really feeds into what we're doing in terms of the work of the curriculum. This will drive and deliver a lot of the change management practices that we want to implement, because this is a huge shift for us. So it's a combination of the two to answer that question.
Yeah, that we've seen, like, over past years, a lot of decisions that are made at the school level as far as what ed tech technologies are going to be brought in. And we're able to, like Tony mentioned, we're able to kind of take a look at all those technologies, find out what's most popular, if it's working well. And if they're not a IMS Global certified product, if they're not a contributing member, we make the introduction. And it's usually pretty well accepted by the actual vendor. And I'll use Encyclopedia Britannica as an example. That was a legacy type solution that was out there that was being used by schools across the district. And we worked with them to ingest the content into our lore and make it available via our lore to everybody in the district.
Okay, we're going to run through two more. There was a question about classroom and enterprise level analysis and reporting. And do you have any real-time analytics back to your teachers for most products? So maybe you can.
Sadly, no. We've cobbled together a couple of solutions from our IT side, and then to get an idea of what's out there. But no, we don't have insight down to the classroom level, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's just a continuous battle. Just piggybacking off that too. So it's a combination of just partnerships with our external partners that are delivering the tools that are being used in the classroom, so getting data back from them, while internally we develop processes and mechanisms to capture what's actually happening. But then there's also a matter of identifying what fidelity looks like in the classroom. So, and then standardizing that process. So one, you ensure the equitable practices and just that knowledge transference of this is how we're using the tool and we use it successfully. And then you scale that out. And then to my colleague's point earlier about then being able to take that information back to the district to say, well, this is an opportunity to do this to scale. Because we standardize the way that it's used. We know that it works. Let's put this in the hands of our teachers and students.
And resources that are in the lore already, that are in Safari Montage, we have some pretty good reports as to what content is being used where, down to the classroom, what teacher, what students, even on what device.
Yes.
So there is some good information. There are great analytics that we're getting from our lore currently. But what we want to do is where there are opportunities to ingest content from third-party providers, we want to bring that stuff into our lore because we want to have a better understanding of ROI. We want to know what's being used and where, and make sure that the investments that we're making across the district are smart ones.
And Safari has been a great partner in that in terms of improving. I know initially we were only seeing resources being viewed. Now they have just completed an upgrade which allows us to see playlists. Because again, it's at the playlist level that the lesson is scaffolded. And now we're starting to get some analytics around, again, schools, individual teachers, down to students, and then the playlists that are being used. So as we roll out the curriculum, the student-facing content is going to be in that playlist format. And what are our learning objects that are being utilized most? What feedback we're getting from the field, and it's going to be more of a software development feedback tool that we're eventually going to be soliciting information from users to get the qualitative data that we need as to what resources are really doing well in the classroom besides like duration of usage.
Okay, I think we're just at our end time, so we'll just have one quick last question. I know Tony talked a little bit about the process and where you are. There is a question about whether or not there's still an opportunity for a curriculum provider or vendor to submit an RFP. So maybe you could just kind of let everyone know where you are in your process and maybe next steps.
Unfortunately, that part is closed. Or fortunately for us, unfortunately for other vendors, that part is closed. We're in the contracting negotiations phase with the vendors at the moment.
I mean, we will be putting out additional RFPs in the future.
There will be yes, that is true.
I think arts, physical education, and
Computer science.
computer science.
So I guess if you're in arts, computer science, or physical education, that opportunity
There's it.
will be out shortly.
And make sure you align to the standards, and you may have an opportunity. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Karen, back to you.
Thank you, guys. Gentlemen, thank you so much again for being on the call today, sharing the insights that you guys have and the work that you guys have done to make the district successful. For our attendees, we have a few action items. We want to make sure that you guys are aware of the IMS resources on our website at imsglobal.org/K12. You're going to find information about our K-12 program, a lot of our end user groups that meet monthly, as well as our K-12 playbook. Lots of resources out there created by IMS, institutional members just like yourself. A lot of those resources are available to you as members as well as you as non-members. So we'd love for you to take a look at that. Also, we would love to encourage you to schedule a meeting with IMS. We want to help your institution define a strategy, plan, and process for migrating to your interoperable digital learning ecosystem like Chicago Public School has. And then we want you to get involved in creating the future of ed tech. We've got a great conference coming up in May, Learning Impact Leadership Institute, and we strongly encourage districts, state agencies, and vendors to get involved in IMS so that together we can advance our community of leadership and continue to move forward and make new things possible. We want to thank you again for being a part of our webinar today. We appreciate the time, and we will send a follow-up email with resources and a recording of today's webinar. Thank you for being here, and bye-bye.